Ezekiel chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. It says, "He cried also in mine ears with a loud voice, saying, Cause them that have charge over the city to draw near, even every man with his destroying weapon in his hand. And behold, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate, which lieth toward the north. And every man had a slaughter weapon in his hand. And one man among them was clothed with linen, with a writer's inkhorn by his side. And they went in and stood beside the brazen altar. And the glory of the Lord of Israel was gone up from the cherub, whereupon he was, to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed with linen, which had the writer's inkhorn by his side. And the Lord said unto him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. And to the others he said in mine hearing, Go ye after him through the city, and smite. Let not your eye spare, neither have ye pity. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women. But come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. And he said unto them, Defile the house, and fill the courts with the slain. Go ye forth. And they went forth and slew in the city. And it came to pass, while they were slaying them, and I was left, that I fell upon my face, and cried, and said, Ah, Lord God, wilt thou destroy all the residue of Israel in thy pouring out of thy fury upon Jerusalem? Then said he unto me, The iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceeding great, and the land is full of blood, and the city full of perverseness. For they say, The Lord hath forsaken the earth, and the Lord seeth not. And as for me also, mine eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity, but I will recompense their way upon their head. And behold, the man clothed with linen, which had the inkhorn by his side, reported the matter, saying, I have done as thou hast commanded me." So, going back to our understanding from chapter 8 last week, Ezekiel was taken by God to Jerusalem. Now, again, there are some people that say that he was physically taken up and transported to Jerusalem. I am not in that camp. I don't think that he was physically moved to Jerusalem. I think that this is a vision that he's seeing, and he's seeing all of these things in this vision, and that this is not something that is literally before his eyes playing out before him. I don't believe this is like John in the book of Revelation. I believe John in the book of Revelation was physically removed from the Isle of Patmos and taken and transported to another place. I don't believe that is the case here. It says now in verse 1, He cried also in mine ears with a loud voice. And so who is the he? He is the person that we see in chapter 8, verse 2. It says, Then I beheld, and lo, a likeness as the appearance of fire, from the appearance of his loins even downward, fire, and from his loins even upward, as the appearance of brightness, as the color of amber. And so this is the same person that he saw back in chapter 1. Again, I personally believe that this is Jesus in his pre-incarnate form, that he is seeing the second person of the Trinity here. So it says that in verse 1, He cried also in mine ears with a loud voice, saying, Cause them that have charge over the city to draw near, even every man with his destroying weapon in his hand. And then it says in verse 2, And behold, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate, which lieth toward the north, and every man had a slaughter weapon in his hand, and one man among them was clothed with linen, with a writer's inkhorn by his side, and they went in and stood beside the brazen altar. And so he's told here, or he hears in his ears, this figure, which I believe is the pre-incarnate form of Christ, saying that them that have charge over the city are supposed to draw near with their destroying weapons in their hands. And then we see in verse 2, 6 men, and they have, it says, every man a slaughter weapon in his hand. And so what I believe that we're looking at, and from what I understand, These 6 men that we see are angels that are being commanded to come forth and present themselves. And they've got weapons. They've got weapons of war, weapons, it says, of slaughter, destroying weapons. And so they are here. There are 6 of them. They are the ones that have charge over the city. And it says one of them, in verse 2, one among them was clothed with linen, with a writer's inkhorn by his side, and they went in and stood beside the brazen altar. Now, I don't know if the one with the writer's inkhorn is of any higher rank than the other 5. I don't know if he is in charge of them and he's their commander. I don't know if he's equal to the others, but I do know he has a special role to play. And we'll see this. We look in verse 3. And the glory of the Lord and the glory of the God of Israel was gone up from the cherub whereupon he was to the threshold of the house, and he called to the man clothed with linen, which had the writer's inkhorn by his side. Now remember, Ezekiel is having, I believe, this vision of the temple in Jerusalem. He's seeing this, and he sees the glory of God upon the cherub, and they're in the temple. But the glory, it says, is gone up from the cherub, whereupon he was, to the threshold of the house. And so I believe this is a picture, or maybe even the literal removing, as we talked about last week, the gradual withdrawal of the Shekinah glory, that dwelling glory, the glory that is present in this one specific place in Israel, that has settled in this one specific place where God has placed his name, and it begins to move. And it moves from where it's at, it moves to the threshold of the house. It says, and he called to the man clothed with linen, which had the writer's inkhorn by his side, and the Lord said unto him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. And so, before we discuss the mark upon the foreheads, let's first discuss the end of verse 4. It says, of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. What are those abominations? We read about them last week in chapter 8. We're not going to go back and read through all of them again, but basically it is idolatry, it is worship of false gods, and also worship of nature itself. These are abominations that are occurring in Jerusalem, in this place that is supposed to be God's holy city. It is supposed to be his capital. It is supposed to be his dwelling place that he set on earth. And it has become this den of mockery and shame. And so, however, there are these men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that are done in the midst thereof. There are a faithful group that see what is going on round about them, and they understand that it is wrong, and they groan within themselves because it is wrong, and because they know that there is sin in God's holy city, and they are upset, they are disturbed by it. They are not partaking, they are not willing to join in because it bothers them. They have a problem with it. And so it says that this one with the inkhorn that's clothed in linen is supposed to set a mark upon the foreheads. And what is the mark? What is its purpose? Well, we see it in the next few verses. It says in verse 5, And to the others he said in mine hearing, Go ye after him through the city, and smite, let not your eye spare, neither have ye pity. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark. The mark is a seal to show the ones who are faithful that they are not subject to the judgment. They are not subject to this execution. Very similar. I hope everyone at this point is familiar with the blood on the lintels and the mantle. And during the Passover time on the doorposts. Very similar to that. It's a mark which the death angel sees and it passes by. it does not enter into that place. It does not take life from that place. It's also very similar to a mark that we read about in the book of Revelation, and we will read a few of these passages here. Again, these should be fairly familiar, but we'll look at them. Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 through 4. Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 through 4. It says, "And after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, neither nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel." And so here is another group that obtains this seal. They obtain a mark that sets them apart. It makes them different. We see in Revelation chapter 9, verses 1 through 5, it says, "And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven into the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion, which when he striketh a man." And so here we see that judgment falls on those that do not have the seal of God in their foreheads at this time during the tribulation period. And so the seal distinguishes those upon whom the judgment comes and upon whom the judgment does not come. Finally, we see in Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 through 3. Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 through 3, it says, "And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne, and before the 4 beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000, which were redeemed from the earth." So these ones with the mark, they are the ones who are redeemed. And it's the same thing that we see back in Ezekiel chapter 9. Now again, I have said that I don't believe that Ezekiel has been literally transported from Babylonia, from the area by the river Kibar to Jerusalem. And so what I believe that he's seeing here is a vision, and I don't believe that it's a literal vision. I believe that what he's seeing is figurative. You'll rarely hear me say that. You'll rarely hear me say, now don't take this literally, take this figuratively, because I think we should try to take it as literally as possible. Now, why would I say that we should take this chapter figuratively instead of literally? Well, what we see here in this command that's given to these 6 men, we see that one of them is commanded to go around and mark, and the other 5 are commanded to go through and kill. And so these 5 men are the ones who slay the men, women, and children. And so when we look back, not only at secular history, but when we look through other scriptures, we see that Nebuchadnezzar's army destroyed and attacked and killed people. And so I'm not saying that there were not angels involved. But what I do know is that it was not only angels that were involved. And here what we're seeing is these 5 are the ones carrying out the task to completion. There's no mention of any aid. There's no mention of any outside help. They're commanded to do the job, and they do it. And so I believe this is a figurative representation of what happens whenever Nebuchadnezzar's army completes its final assault upon the city of Jerusalem. I don't believe that this is something that Ezekiel is literally seeing that literally happened in history. if it did, it would have happened alongside the judgments that came. And I don't believe that Ezekiel here sees those, because he doesn't describe the army of Nebuchadnezzar. He just describes these 5 men. And so, is it possible then that Ezekiel is so caught up in these 5 that are going out and destroying that he doesn't notice the rest? Technically, yes, that's possible, but I feel like that he would not neglect to mention the Babylonian army, considering that he's been instructed to prophesy about the death and the judgment that's coming at the hands of the Babylonians. He's basically been giving a repeat of Jeremiah's messages to these people that have been taken into the first wave of the captivity. So, that being said, I hope that we have a good grasp on, how we should understand this chapter, how we should understand what's going on within the frame and the context of all the other events that are happening in the book, within the frame and the context of the biblical history that's occurring around about this time with the prophet Jeremiah, and then later with Ezra and Nehemiah. So, again, we'll read here, going into verse 6. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and began at my sanctuary. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. And he said unto them, Defile the house and fill the courts with the slain, go ye forth. And they went forth and slew in the city. And it came to pass, while they were slaying them, and I was left, that I fell upon my face and cried and said, Ah, Lord God, wilt thou destroy all the residue of Israel, and thy pouring out of thy fury upon Jerusalem? And so Ezekiel here, he's fretting. He's got problems. He's worried that everybody's going to die. And why would he be worried about that? Well, as a priest, he knew, he had a pretty good idea how the people were living whenever he was in Jerusalem, whenever he did live there. He knew the trend that was happening. He probably was a little bit like Elijah, thinking that he was maybe the only one that was faithful. And he was kind of worried that nobody was going to end up with marks on their foreheads, that nobody was going to be faithful. And so he's worried. He said, are you going to just take out the whole thing? Even though that he's already been told by God that that's what's going to happen. He's already been instructed in that matter. He's already prophesied about it. But for him to see it in this vision, it is so much upon his spirit and upon his soul that it is difficult for him to comprehend. It is difficult for him to see this violence that is occurring in this vision before his eyes. And so he reacts this way, and he's worried that everything will be destroyed and that all the people will be taken out. It says in verse 9, Then he said unto me, The iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceeding great, and the land is full of blood, and the city full of perverseness, for they say, The Lord hath forsaken the earth, and the Lord seeth not. And so when God is asked, Wilt thou destroy all the residue of Israel, and thy pouring out of thy fury upon Jerusalem? God says, their iniquity is great. He doesn't say, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit too harsh, I went too far, I overdid it. That's not what he says at all. He says, their iniquity is great. He says, exceeding great. He says, the land is full of blood, and the city full of perverseness. For they say, and we read about this in chapter 8, so this should be familiar again this week, the Lord hath forsaken the earth, and the Lord seeth not. They have this attitude that God has turned his back, that he is no longer watching, and even if he is watching, he doesn't care anyway. He's not seeing what we do. So we need to worship these other gods who can take care of us. We need to worship this cycle of nature that takes care of us. And so you see how this goes. When people turn their eyes away from God, they replace God with something. It's a real popular thing today to replace that with your own self. And you see, that's kind of the tendency that a lot of people have. And unfortunately, that's kind of a trend with a lot of American Christians because our culture is so steeped in materialism. Because God has blessed us with so much physical abundance that we're raised in this culture where physical abundance is good, and so we need more. It's always more. More is always better. That's the kind of culture we're raised and brought up into in the United States. There are other places on earth you go and they barely have enough food to eat. They barely have any shoes or any clothes. That's one of the reasons why Operation Christmas Child is such a good ministry, because they provide those necessities to those people in those areas. But you see them in those places, and they don't have that mindset of more is always better. I need to get more. I need to produce more. I need to be industrious. I need to take initiative. I need to create something. I need to make money. That's not their priority in life. Their priority is to get fed, and once they're fed, they're satisfied. At least a good chunk of them are. And so I'm not saying that that's how we need to go back to, but I'm saying that there is a difference. And Jerusalem here has long had the privilege of being God's chosen people. They've long had the privilege for generation upon generation of being protected under God's mercy. Even though there were times where they did experience some minor judgments along the way, they did not have to be completely and utterly destroyed. They never had to. They did not fear that, and you can see that clearly in this people. Going back through the study of the book of Jeremiah, it is utterly impossible in their minds for them to consider that God is actually going to judge them fully and outright in the way that Jeremiah tells them. They cannot conceive of it. In the same way that so many people in the United States cannot conceive of a way that any nation would ever rise before us, or that we would ever become under serious threat. That's kind of the same attitude. And we've also had the same attitude in this nation, that God doesn't see anything. Well, he's not there, and even if he were, what difference would it make? That's the attitude. But God says the iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceeding great. He is aware. He does see. He does know. And he will execute his holy and righteous and perfect judgment. He says in verse 10, As for me also, mine eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity, but I will recompense their way upon their head. And so he says, I will achieve it. He says, I will recompense their way upon their head. He says, you want to worship nature, you're going to be destroyed. There's a trend in this nation, and I won't get too political, I won't get too deep into it, but it's very popular nowadays to believe that we are overpopulating the earth, that there are too many people on earth for the planet to sustain it, and so in order to protect the planet, we have to reduce our population, we have to change the way that we manufacture goods, we have to change the way that we produce energy. Now, I'll put a little disclaimer out here. I don't necessarily think that new energy forms are inherently bad in and of themselves. I'm all for good, smart, initiative technology. Somebody wants to create something new that's efficient and works, good on them. That's as far as I'll take that. I don't care. I don't care whether we use oil, whether we use solar, whether we use nuclear. Whatever works, I'm fine with. So we're not getting into that. But there is a group of people who think that we must absolutely abandon everything that we've achieved up to now and immediately switch to something new, and they're willing to sacrifice human lives to do it. Because the truth of the matter is, our system is set up in such a way that it does rely on certain energy types, and it is impossible without causing massive starvation, without causing massive economic issues, without causing massive transportation issues, massive heating and cooling issues, massive production issues. Most of our energy is used in the production of goods, not in the heating and cooling of homes. You know, if we were to do that for the sake of this rock, which is an inanimate object, you know, we'd be literally sacrificing to the gods. It is a form of worship of a goddess called, in Greek mythology, Gaia. And so there's actually a term within the scientific community called Gaiaism. And people actually are proud to take on this stance where they say we need to shrink our numbers. We need to protect the planet. You know, as far as I'm aware, you know, God gave us dominion over the planet. He gave us dominion over the creatures within the planet. I'm not advocating that we should waste that and be negligent and unwise and imprudent and just destroy everything in our wake and you know, be gluttonous in our consumption. But God is the one who made this rock, and He's got a plan for it, and it's not going to go away until He says so. So I think that people ought to take a very serious look, especially any Christians that get drawn into this. I don't understand how you can be a Bible-believing Christian and get drawn into the idea that we're going to be dead in 15 years because we're going to run out of resources and the planet's going to overheat. I don't understand how you can have a biblical viewpoint and also have that viewpoint. They don't mesh, you know. That's right. That's right. You know, God will overheat it whenever He sees fit. So, enough about that. You know, we're just wanted to draw the parallel between how they worship these false gods. They worship themselves, they worship the false gods, and they go into worshiping nature itself. And that's how we're going. We're going from worshiping God as a society to worshiping money and performing all these pagan rituals, you know, people joining these secret societies and doing whatever else and joining clubs and the birth control pill and everything that did to harm the workings of society. Not saying that pill in and of itself is an evil thing, but it did lead to some pretty bad results that have not been good for women, have not been good for children, and also have not been good for men either. So we went through that, and now we are at this place in our society where it's popular and it's in and it's stylish to worship the planet, to worship nature itself. And so we're following the same footsteps. We're on the same path. And that path leads to the same destination. You know, sin necessitates judgment. So, verse 11 says, "And behold, the man clothed with linen, which had the inkhorn by his side, reported the matter, saying, I have done as thou hast commanded me." He completed his mission. And the other 5 did too. And so we know, again, from the history of the destruction of Jerusalem, both from secular and from biblical sources, that what Ezekiel prophesied and what we read about chapters ago in chapter 5, all the horrible things that people would do. We know that happened. We studied through all that. We know God said it would happen hundreds of years ahead. If they ever wound up in this situation, that they would end up there, and that's exactly where it wound up. According to Ezekiel and according to Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations, that is exactly where it wound up. And so we shouldn't be so egotistical and so caught up in our own selves and so proud as to think that something similar cannot happen to us. And I don't just mean that for the United States. That could be a lesson to be learned by anybody on this earth. Pride goeth before the fall. So it just seems like we have a double dose of it here in this country. So that being said, that is Ezekiel chapter 9. We have a few minutes for comments and questions if anybody has any.